Hey everyone, welcome to my second edition of Collection Corner, where I'll be looking at, in this case, the 1983 Topps regular set. This set is my second favorite set of all time. 73 Topps is my favorite set. I've already done a video on that, which you can find on my channel. This is by far my favorite set of the 1980s, and I'll get into some of the reasons why. Before we do that, just value-wise, I have the most recent edition of Beckett, or maybe there's been one since this, but it's pretty recent. So if you look at 83 Topps there, the complete set, and I typically read those prices as near mint to mint. So the complete set is $80. You can see there are the three key rookies, Tony Gwynn, Wade Boggs, Ryne Sandberg. And then beyond that, there's real nice Cal Ripken second-year card, a Nolan Ryan card, and then a handful of, George Brett at $3, and so on. So that's it lists at $80, but you can easily find a near mint-ish version of this set on eBay for between $50 and $60. They come up all the time. So just in terms of the design, I just have a Don Sutton here, you have, the focal picture, generally pretty good photography by the standards of early 1980s baseball cards. And then you have the close-up, the headshot of all the players. And just the way that this card visually is put together, I think it's the best looking card in the 1980s. Maybe you could throw 1989 Upper Deck in the same class. But I think for sure this was the nicest looking set that Topps did in the 1980s. In terms of the back design, just, basically they're packed with stats. And a lot of the players that I'll be showing, they're established veterans, so there's not much room for anything else in the back. If you take someone who had a shorter career at the time, like Harold Baines, there might be, a factoid or a highlight. But even the back, I find very appealing. That sort of orange and cardboard brown, easy to read. Everything's laid out in a pretty satisfying way. So visually, I love this set. What I really love about it is just the massive number of Hall of Famers, and at very different times of their careers. Some are just finishing up their career. This might be the last card. The last year in which they had a baseball card as a player. Others are just getting started with their careers. Obviously, there were the three big rookies that I mentioned earlier that I'll show you. But I mean, to just run through these. So these are all Hall of Famers. You got Don Sutton. I won't spend a lot of time on any of these. You got Gary Carter, Hall of Famer. Bert Blyleven as an Indian, Hall of Famer. George Brett. And again, all these cards, I just like looking at them. Harold Baines, arguably not really a Hall of Fame career, but he's a Hall of Famer. He was voted in. Rod Carew, Hall of Famer. He's got that awesome headband on in the headshot. Raleigh Fingers with the most classic baseball mustache of all time. You got Eckersley, back on the Red Sox. Goose Gossage. And these are all Hall of Famers. Carlton Fisk. Andre Dawson. Another, I would say, borderline Hall of Famer, but he did make it into the club. Fergie Jenkins, towards the end of his career. Keith Hernandez. I think that may be, outside of the Indians, my favorite uniform of all time. Those early 80s Cardinals uniforms were just fantastic. Jack Morris, another great mustache. Phil Niekro. He had a couple years after this, but this was in the twilight of his career. Tony Perez, one of the stars of those 70s Reds teams. You got Jim Rice, who I believe right around this time was the highest paid player in baseball. Tim Raines, another sort of borderline case for the Hall of Fame. Lee Smith, maybe the greatest second greatest reliever the game has ever known, second to maybe Mariano Rivera. Alan Trammell, yet another borderline Hall of Famer, I would say. And then you start, I guess, classing it up a bit. You got Robin Yount. You got Wizard of Oz. That's another just beautiful card. Jim Palmer. You got Joe Morgan closing out his career. Paul Molitor. Steve Carlton. A couple more years left on his career at this point. Dave Winfield. Eddie Murray. And still, I mean, everyone's a Hall of Famer that I have shown so far. You got Reggie Jackson, one of my favorites from back in the day, and then my actual favorite player from back in the day, and probably still today, Johnny Bench. You got Carl Yastrzemski near the very end of his career. I think he played, actually 83 was the last year of his career. This obviously covers the 1982 season. Got Tom Seaver. Pete Rose, obviously not in the Hall of Fame, but should be, in my opinion. You got a fairly early Rickey Henderson card, third-year card. I guess we'll do the math here, 80, 81, 82, 83. So the fourth-year card for Rickey. And then you got the Cal Ripken. And the set I got, I purchased a set of these. I honestly think, and they advertise it as near mint, I think most of these cards are real close to that. I've thought about getting some of these graded, but I have never gotten a card graded. It just seems too expensive to me. And I'm not really into collecting for investment purposes, so I like having the cards in a regular sized holder and being able to sort them out and interact with them a little bit more. You got the Nolan Ryan card, and then you got the three rookies, Ryan Sandberg, Tony Gwynn, and Wade Boggs. And of course, they're all Hall of Famers as well. So that right there, Pete Rose aside, that's a stack of 38 Hall of Famers with player cards. And there'll be one more to come who is a manager at the time, but he got into the Hall of Fame for his playing, not his managing. Then I always pull out, when I am looking at old sets, I pull out all the Hall of Famers. I usually pull out these guys as well. Dan Quisenberry, Steve Garvey, Fred Lynn, and Dale Murphy. I think each of these guys has a strong, if a guy like Harold Baines is getting in, I think each of these four guys has a strong case as well. Whether or not they ever get in, I really enjoyed all of these guys in the 80s. To me, they were big stars, so I always collect these out of any set that I find them in. So then you had these all-star cards, and the way it worked in the 80s, Topps always had an all-star variety for the cards. They were always worth less than the actual players, so they were somewhat less desirable. But again, if you're just interested in Hall of Famers, all these guys, Gary Carter, George Brett, Andre Dawson, Carlton Fisk, Tim Raines, Pete Rose, Mike Schmidt, not Murphy, not Fred Lynn, but Robin Yount and Bruce Sutter, not Quisenberry. But a good portion of these guys are also Hall of Famers, so it's just yet another Hall of Famer card you get out of this set. And again, these are pretty simple. It's another picture of the player, some different colors. You get the nice star on there, AL or NL. Then something else that Topps did this year was a Super Veterans series, and they had a pretty high hit rate on these guys also finding their way into the Hall of Fame. You got Johnny Bench. They had a young, like the rookie year version of the player, and then the present day version. And on the back, you got some career highlights. And, obviously in the early 80s, you didn't have Baseball Reference, you didn't have the internet. This is where you got your information. Unless you got an encyclopedia of baseball out of the library, this was where you got a lot of great, interesting information about the players. So I loved to read these when I was a kid. But you got Johnny Bench, you got Steve Carlton, You got Raleigh Fingers, Goose Gossage, Phil Niekro, Jim Palmer, Tony Perez, not a Hall of Famer, all the others were, Nolan Ryan, Mike Schmidt, Tom Seaver, Carl Yastrzemski. I mean, they just keep going. Don Sutton, Bruce Sutter, just a bunch of really great cards with, again, each one has a bunch of highlights and factoids on the back. Then you had these team leader cards, which I'll show you in a moment. There's also just general like league leader cards, but these team leader cards often also had Hall of Famers on them. Steve Carlton there, Fergie Jenkins, Eddie Murray and Jim Palmer, Phil Niekro, Hall of Famer, and Dale Murphy, who I think probably should be, Jim Rice, Robin Yount. And then again, you have these cards that have, you know, the league leaders, and in a couple cases, you have Bruce Sutter there. You have Dale Murphy, who I've talked about, who I like. And then I actually collect Hall of Fame managers as well. This is the Frank Robinson, who is in the Hall of Fame primarily for his playing abilities. So it's not really a player card, but hey, you get a Frank Robinson in this set to add just one more Hall of Famer. But again, Sparky Anderson, Hall of Fame. Bobby Cox, Hall of Fame. Earl Weaver, Hall of Fame. Tommy Lasorda, Hall of Fame. Tony La Russa, Joe Torre. And then Billy Martin, he's not in the Hall of Fame, but he was one of the best personalities. Him and Steinbrenner's relationship in the 70s and 80s. So I always pull this card out as well. But so you get all that perhaps for as little as $50, $55. You get all of these Hall of Famers. You get the three key rookie cards, who again are also all Hall of Famers. You get a really nice Nolan Ryan. You get a really nice Cal Ripken. And these are cards that I pull out from time to time just to look at because they're just so aesthetically pleasing. So if you're thinking of picking up, like, I guess I would call these vintage. I don't really consider cards vintage until you get back to about 83. Even 84 tops, it's in that transition period before we got to the junk wax era. So for me, this and Moving Back is really the first vintage card. So if you want to start a vintage collection that is affordable, where you're going to get, you know, it's just chock full of Hall of Famers, I would consider collecting some 1983 tops. So that's it for this edition of Collection Corner. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and give me a like and subscribe and comment and all that good stuff, and watch my other videos. And I'll be back soon.